Welcome back to another great episode of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I'm your host, Dr. J, broadcasting from the City of Angels, and we are broadcasting on 107.7 FM, New Orleans, Louisiana. That is UPRN, as well as Deprogrammed Radio in the United Kingdom, plus all the other affiliates from here, and not just Europe. Actually, remember, I was talking about just the other night how I just found out recently they're listening to us in Hong Kong. That's pretty damn cool. Also want to thank iHeartMedia, who owns iHeartRadio, who essentially owns pretty much everything at this point. So today we have a very special show for you today. Let me give you a quick background real quick. You've heard my guest on multiple times on this show going back 7 years. But what you probably didn't know is that a lot of what he says is a lot of what I've actually been able to be shaped and formed to become what I become on air, the radio host. A lot of the words he spoke 25 plus years ago, I was paying attention and really wanting to ask the questions that I finally had a chance to. And over the years, he's still one of the greatest people alive, and he is legendary, very legendary, as you saw me post today that he is the one and only true legend, John Lear. John, welcome back.
Hey, thanks. Nice to be here.
So what's going on new in the UFO world?
Well, I not too much on the UFO thing, but I would like to talk about the Boeing 737 Max.
Yes.
You know, it's the biggest trouble Boeing has ever been in. I don't know how they're going to get out of it, but I'll tell you what the problem is. The problem is, back in the 80s, Boeing decided unilaterally to solve the hijack problem. And what they did was they secretly put in all of their airplanes, now not just the 737, but the 757, 767, 777, 787, 797, all of them, a second and secret autopilot. Now, I'm pretty sure they didn't ask for FAA certification, which is one of their problems, because they didn't think they'd ever get caught. But what they did is they put in a second autopilot that they can control by satellite. And what they did was they assumed that when a hijacker told the pilot, I'm hijacking this airplane, here's where I want you to go, they made it so that the pilot had no control over that airplane, but that Boeing, with a secret room in Seattle, the big complex, Boeing complex there, they could, through satellite, control where that airplane went. And they could control it through satellite and land it anywhere they wanted.
Remotely, essentially, right?
Pardon?
Remotely.
Right, remotely. And what they did was all autopilots, yaw dampers, automatic flight controls, all of them have servos. Actually, they're actuator servos. And what they do, that's the gadget through which the controls, cables, or if it's electronic works, to actually run the ailerons, rudders, elevators, all that. It's called a servo. And all of these servos are usually set to about 80 pounds of force. So the reason they're set at 80 is in case anything goes wrong, the pilot can overpower it. And he can do so with 80 pounds of force, which is really not all that much, and he could take over. Now, just go to back a couple of, maybe 20, 25 years ago, and there was 2 accidents. The one was United Airlines 585 in Colorado Springs, and the other was, I think, Delta Boeing 727 in Pittsburgh, and I'm not sure it was Delta, but Anyway, both of those accidents were captain pilot suicides. The captain took over the airplane and just flew it into the ground. Now, this is something that the FAA could not ever, ever, ever tell the public. So they came up with with both of these accidents. Now, let's see, in Colorado Springs, I forget which one was 92. One of them was in 96. And they were both, according to the FAA, unsolvable. But what they had to do was figure out a way to blame both of them on the same thing. And they came up with yaw damper failure. Now, the yaw damper is what controls the rudder, and it damps out the divergent or unwanted fishtailing of the airplane, and it keeps it absolutely straight. When you take off, you turn on the yaw damper, and you can fly it to the left, to the right, or up or down, and the rudder will always stay straight. So what they did was blame both these accidents on a yaw damper, and had Boeing design a new yaw damper to fix the problem. But that was all BS. It had nothing to do with the yaw damper. Both of these were pilot suicides, and the one in Colorado Springs was the captain had been dating the first officer, a lady, and apparently the night before in Denver, now this was a Denver to Colorado Springs flight, only took about 20 minutes. Mm-hmm. Apparently the lady had found out that the captain was messing around with another woman, and she was pretty ticked off about this. So when they got in the airplane that morning, they argued all the way down to Colorado Springs, all the 20 minutes, and she just said, you're done for. I'm not going to ever see you again, so you might as well get used to it. So the captain was pretty ticked off about this. So on final approach at Colorado Springs at about 1,000 feet, he did what is known in the industry as a split S, and that's where you take the roll control, or the stick, and turn it all the way to the left or right. In this case, it was to the left, airplane upside down, and then pull the stick back so that it goes straight into the ground. Now, split S normally is done at much higher altitude, so that when you pull the airplane through, that you have enough room to pull it out. But in this case, it was only at 1,000 feet, and he knew that the airplane would go straight in. And I don't know, I can't remember how many people were killed in that accident, but that was his fault. Now, the co-pilot, the woman, in trying to save the airplane, had such strength that she actually bent her wheel. Both the captains and the co-pilot each have a control wheel called a yoke. She actually bent hers about 70 degrees to the right. Now, how she had enough strength to do that, we don't know. But she tried to save the airplane. But the captain overrode, and it flew into the ground and killed everybody. In the case of the Pittsburgh accident, we don't know what the captain's problem was, but he decided to end his life and take all the passengers with him. And I think there were like 150 passengers, a Boeing 727. And this was on final at Pittsburgh. And he took everybody with him. Now, the voice recorders didn't tell us much, except that in both cases, the co-pilot could not override what the captain did. So what they did is when Boeing blamed the yaw damper, that was complete BS, because all yaw damper actuator servos, all automatic flight control, all autopilot servos are set to 80 pounds so that the pilot can over control it. So when they said, both in the Colorado Springs and the Pittsburgh accident, that the yaw damper went diversion that couldn't be over controlled was complete BS. It only takes 80 pounds, and either the pilot or the co-pilot could have taken over if it had been a yaw damper failure. But it wasn't. They were just suicide. So anyway, they got Boeing to design a new yaw damper and installed all the new yaw dampers in the airplanes, and everything was forgotten about that. But now, just before that, in the middle '80s, Boeing decided unilaterally to put in a second autopilot, and if the hijacker said, "Take me to Havana or wherever," they would, Boeing would take, and we know this because the captain would say on the radio, "I've been hijacked," and give the data. Boeing could take over the airplane through satellite and control the airplane. Now, what they did was they set the servo actuators to 150 pounds. And the reason they did that is they wanted to take complete control of the airplane away from the pilot, so that if the hijacker said, "Take me to Havana," the pilot could say, "Look, I have no control over this airplane. Go ahead, try it yourself. You can't even turn the wheel." And meanwhile, Boeing is flying remotely through satellite that airplane to an airport where they would have police and FBI and everybody ready to get the hijacker. So this was Boeing's unilateral idea to solve the hijacking problem. So now we go down many, many years later. Nothing is ever done with the hijacking. They didn't have that many hijackings, and they weren't on Boeing airplanes anyway. But now we come to the Lion Air airplane in Malaysia, and killed a number of passengers. And then right after that, we had the Ethiopian Airlines in Ethiopia killed a number of passengers. And what they did was they grounded the Boeing 737 MAX because they're both the same airplane. But it really didn't matter, because what happened was somebody, and I'll leave it up to you who that somebody is, figured out by remote control how to hack in to that autopilot and give it a full nose down command, which is what happened both in Lion Air and in Ethiopian. And when it gives it a full down command, the pilot can't do anything about it because the actuator servos are set to 150 pounds pressure. So
versus 80 pounds, you mean?
No, set to 150, so that the pilot can't control it. The original autopilot, the first autopilot, is set to 80 pounds. They can control that. But Boeing put in a secret second autopilot set to 150 pounds that the pilot can't override.
So,
got it?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. So 80 versus 150 pounds. 150 pounds meaning that's the one you can't.
That's the one you cannot override. So somebody figured out how to hack into the second autopilot, and incidentally, the second autopilot is called the BUA, the Boeing Uninterruptible Autopilot. And this organization, whoever it might be, I have my own suspicions, if they didn't like somebody on the airplane and wanted to kill that person, all they had to do was give a full nose down command to the airplane, and the pilot would have no control, and it would kill all people on board. And then you'd say, well, are they going to kill one person? Are they going to take all 150 people for just that one person? And the answer is yes.
Yes.
And that's what happened both in Lion Air and Ethiopian Air. There was somebody on that airplane that they wanted to get rid of, and they didn't care whether it took, 150 or other passengers with it. They wanted to get rid of that one guy. And they figured that nobody would ever figure it out that they did that, because they'd say, well, nobody would kill 150 people for just one person. But the fact is they did do it. Now, come to Lion Air and the Ethiopian problem, Boeing has a major problem because they know what's wrong, but they don't know how to fix it. There's no possible way that Boeing could say, oh, you know what, it's that second autopilot. And in both cases, Lion Air, the pilots couldn't control it. It was at high speed, and it just had a full nose down command, and they couldn't control it. And it was somebody hacked into that autopilot. Of course, they can't admit that. So what they did first was to say, "Oh, it's a software program,
yeah.
software problem with the MCAS." Now, the MCAS is a program that prevents stalls in the low-speed regime around 100 to 150 knots. And that has nothing to do and would have nothing to do with the high-speed regime, which is where both these accidents happened. Both happened over, the airplane was going over 300 knots. So Boeing tried to say that it was the MCAS, and for the people who knew about airplanes, they knew it can't possibly have been a software program with the MCAS because that was in the low-speed regime. These accidents happen in the high speed.
400 knots, right? Maybe even 500.
Yeah. Well, airliners can't go more than 350 knots. That's their speed.
Gotcha.
Okay, so now the next thing they came up with is they were going to say that the Boeing 737 MAX 8 had the engines put too far forward of the center of gravity and were too low to the ground.
I remember this explanation, yes.
That's complete nonsense. And the airplane was certificated. Nobody had any problem. But Boeing's problem is they had to figure out an excuse to why these airplanes crash, and they can't say it's the second autopilot because the second autopilot is not supposed to exist. So it leaves Boeing with a major problem. They've got Boeing 737s parked all over their Seattle ramp. They're now using the employee parking lot to park them because nobody will fly them. The problem is it's not just the 737 MAX, it's every single Boeing airplane has this second autopilot except for one airline, and that airline is Lufthansa. And when they started buying Boeing airplanes and found out about the second autopilot, they refused to accept it. And they told Boeing, if you want us to buy this airplane, you take out that second autopilot because we don't want it in there because we know what can happen. So if you want to go anywhere in the world these days, you want to fly Lufthansa because they don't have the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot in it.
Do you know anything about the Airbus? Do they have the same second autopilot?
I don't know. I've heard that they do, but I don't have any contacts that can say that. Now the German airplane, I think, was an Airbus, and it had the same identical problem in France when it crashed. And I haven't followed that too carefully, but if it did have a BUA autopilot in it or something similar, then that airplane, that particular crash was the same type of deal where it was given a full nose down command and went straight into the mountain. So that's a possibility, but I haven't followed that through.
Back a few years ago, remember we had the MH370, the Malaysia flight that disappeared?
Yeah.
And then a few days later, you had a similar looking plane appear in Tel Aviv, and then it was shot down over Russia or Crimea, they say, over Ukraine. Was that too also controlled?
Absolutely. MS-370 was hijacked by this same group of people. And the reason they did is because there was 5 Chinese engineers on that Boeing airplane, that Malaysia 370, and they jointly, those 5 engineers, Chinese engineers, jointly held a patent with Jacob Rothschild in France of a patent that was worth trillions of dollars because it was so exclusive, and I never did find out exactly what the patent was, but it was worth a lot of money. And this group that I'm talking about wanted to get complete control of that patent. So what they did is they hijacked MS-370, flew it to Diego Garcia, had it refueled there, and then flew it to Tel Aviv. And on the way to Tel Aviv, they increased the cabin pressure, reduced it to kill everybody on board. And I'm trying to think. I think there was 240 passengers on there, whatever. Anyway, it landed at Tel Aviv. At Tel Aviv, what they did was they outfitted this autopilot, the BUA autopilot, to be able to control by a jet flying alongside it. So what happened is this organization fabricated Malaysia 17 flying from Schiphol, Amsterdam, to Malaysia. And it never existed. There was no MS-17. But what it was supposed to do, if it did go, it was going to go straight across east out of Amsterdam towards Malaysia, which would bring it just south of Ukraine. And what they did was, when this fictitious flight took off, they took off from Tel Aviv and intercepted where the fictitious MS-17 would have been, and put the 370 in that same route. And then there's two jets flying alongside it, controlling it, and they flew it to the east until they get to Ukraine. They got to the border of Ukraine, and they turned a little bit to the left into Ukraine, and then flew it to the Zionist-controlled area of Ukraine, and then shot it down. Now, they immediately blamed the Russians, which had nothing to do with it, and it crashed, killing everybody, including the 5 Chinese engineers, and the doctors that originally got to the crash scene right after it happened said, something's wrong here. These passengers have been dead for 3 weeks. How could they have been in this airplane? And that, of course, all that information was suppressed. Anyway, the patent then went to Jacob Rothschild, major part owner in Carlyle Group. And oddly enough, about 3 months later, Jacob Rothschild was killed in midair. As a matter of fact, a friend of mine who flew with me at Caletta was the pilot of that helicopter that Jacob Rothschild was in when it had a midair with a Cessna 150. So anyway, Jacob Rothschild gets that, and the entire patent goes to the Carlyle Group. We all know the Carlyle Group has been controlled by Israelis forever. So anyway, that's the story on the Boeing 737 MAX.
The defense contractor, you mentioned the 5 Chinese engineers. This was a military defense, a Chinese defense contractor that they wanted the patent, right? That's who originally held this patent. Am I correct on that?
I don't know about that. You probably know more about that than I do. All I know, it was a patent. Very
remember that the boyfriend of one of a woman that worked for this Chinese Defense Department group, or this private military group, he had something on board, and when you said they landed in Diego Garcia, what he did was he took a photograph from his iPhone into his pocket, so it's just blackness.
But I remember that.
Yeah, it had the metadata of where he was at the time, and that was the best part, because you can't deny that.
I do remember that, yeah.
Let me ask you this. I'm seeing here in the chat a lot of questions about the TR-3B. What do you know about the TR-3B?
Almost nothing. But what I do know is everything that was at S4, where Bob Lazar worked, about 4 years ago, was moved to Woomera in South Central Australia. And the reason was because they were getting, and I say they now, I think our entire country is owned by the Nazi Zionist Alliance, which has been in force since the middle of World War II, And I call the Nevada test site the kingdom of the Nazi Zionist alliance. And what they did is they moved all of the ET, extraterrestrial stuff, and all the anti-grav stuff to Woomera. Now, Woomera was where the Australians did all their nuclear tests, like 50, 60 years ago, or maybe 40, 50 years ago. And there's all kinds of underground installations, underground hangars, all kinds of stuff, and it was a perfect place for them to move all their anti-grav stuff because they were tired of people going up to the Rachel just outside Groom Lake and watching all their tests. They wanted to keep it secret.
Little alien, right? In Rachel, Nevada, yeah.
Right. So they moved everything down to Woomera, and fortunately, I have a friend that lives there and keeps me up to date with what's going on there. And there are a lot of tests, and one of the interesting things they do is one night he saw 9 of them. There was 5 that were flying that had perfect triangle shapes, and then 4 behind it that had elongated triangle shapes, and all had the 3 lights on each end. But what was interesting about it at night was that he heard as they were flying over a reciprocating engine sound, and what they had figured out to do is broadcast an airplane engine sound, like a twin engine or something like that, so that a person wouldn't look up. Now, a person will look up at a light and wonder what it is, but if they hear airplane engine, they won't look up because they know it's an airplane.
They're going to dismiss it, absolutely. That makes sense. What a way to cover it up. Just, have the noise of something that everyone knows.
Absolutely.
Now, so you said they moved everything out of the U.S. because of the prying eyes, and I have always figured that they left the government's hands and went to private military hands. So this makes sense to me that they would be sent to Australia. You got a controlled island. They're very strict on who they let into their country as far as becoming a citizen. I mean, it's almost impossible for an American to become a citizen unless you're really going to...
I tried it.
Yeah.
I tried it.
Oh, really? What years?
This was, was with American Transair, I think about maybe 95, 96. I went we took a vacation there, and I started looking into moving there, but they wanted $1 million cash.
Jeez, I believe that. Yeah, that's absolutely believable because they just want to control the numbers of the population. I have family there, and they told me it's pretty much impossible for me to go live with them and then eventually become a citizen. It's not going to happen. That's what they basically told me.
What's interesting about Australia is the U.S. has 13 major military bases there. Not only submarine bases, but airplane and military bases. And there's 13 of them now. 20 years ago, there was only 10 of them, but they've increased it now to 13. We have an enormous presence there.
So we added 3 more bases in a matter of 10 years. That's billions of dollars, if not close to, $1 trillion, I would think, because, every time they open a base, you have to staff it. You have all the security. You need someone who's doing technical expertise to do the networking, things like that. I mean, I would clearly think that setting up these 3 bases combined would probably have cost an easily $1 trillion.
Right. They set up a new base at the Nevada test site beginning in 1982, and what was interesting was I, at that time, was a pilot for the Department of Energy, and I flew a North American OV-10, which was a Bronco twin turboprop, and my job was to fly around the Nevada test site 2 hours before they did an underground nuke test. And my job was to give them the wind direction and wind speed from ground level to 10,000 feet. And the reason they wanted that is they wanted to be sure that in case this underground nuke test vented, they wanted to be sure that none of that debris that vented would blow towards Las Vegas. So while I'm flying this perimeter every nuke test for 2 hours, I got to see a lot of stuff. Now, where they were setting off the nuke tests were not very near Groom Lake. Groom Lake was maybe 20 miles to the northeast. I couldn't see anything there. But what I did see was on the Paiute Mesa, which is essentially in the south central part of the Nevada test site, a huge area of white. It looked like somebody had painted it white, and I couldn't figure out what was making it white. And only did I find out about 6 or 7 years later that they were building a base on the Paiute Mesa, and what they did is there was a large mountain there, and they took the top off this mountain and built the secret base inside, and then put the mountain, all the dirt back on. And what was the deal is that mountains was mainly quartz. And so what I saw was when they had taken the top off the mountain, all that quartz was lying around and made it look white. These days, it's just you can't tell it's there, and it's an enormous space. It takes 3,000 people to run it. There's all kinds of stuff. I think that's the center for the kingdom of the Nazi Zionist Alliance. And when they got ready to go and even before they got ready to go, they knew they would have a problem getting 3,000 people up in the morning and 3,000 people back in the evening. It's a lot of people to move, and they couldn't use Special Projects. Now, Special Projects is the company or the organization that runs all the people from Las Vegas up to Groom Lake and to Tonopah Test Range and to a couple of other secret test sites. And they do it out of their facility, which sits on the northwest portion of McCarran Field. And you can look in Google Earth and see there's 2 big facilities. One is where all the passengers go to get on the airplane, and the other is the executive portion that's just a little bit to the northeast of a couple hundred feet. I've driven around there many years ago, and they just built a new facility there, and it looks space age. It's really cool. All kinds of black windows and stuff. And as you know, these days when they put windows in, they control the density, how you can see through it. In other words, if they're just going to let the light of day in, they turn the controls down and you can see completely through the glass. But if something's going on there you don't want people to see, you can turn this switch and gradually increase the density, the darkness, until you can't see it at all. And those are the kind of windows that are in use there. So anyway, they have this problem moving these many people, and they decided to build, at the cost of, I think it was close to $3 billion, an underground subway maglev. The maglev that goes 300 miles an hour.
Yeah, and the fastest train.
And build it from the Luxor to the Bellagio to the secret base and test site, which I call Sandia. Now, that was the original name, but I'm sure it's changed now. I don't know what they call it. But anyway, their problem was to figure out a place to start, because when you build an underground subway, you don't start underground. You have to start on
above
top.
ground, that's right.
Above ground, and they needed about 75 acres. And it just happened that the Stardust Hotel and Casino was raised many years ago, and that 75 acres was sitting vacant. And what they did is Boyd Gaming bought that acreage, and that's where they started building the underground subway. But the problem is they had huge equipment. They had to build tunnels that went down, and they had a lot of people in there. And that Stardust was right on Las Vegas Boulevard, so they had to hide it. So what they did is they built a fake casino called the Echelon, and they told everybody that the Echelon was going to be a new casino, and but they built the structure just alongside Las Vegas Boulevard so that nobody could see inside, and then they had further walls hiding it from Industrial Road, which is on the west, and Desert Inn Road, which is to the south. And they had it all fixed so that nobody could see what was going on inside. And the people that worked on I had a friend that worked on the fake casino. It was a huge structure, nothing but, steel girders. And when they were building it, every morning they would be briefed when they went to work. They said, don't look over the side because we have CIA sharpshooters with high-powered rifles that will kill you instantly, so don't even think about looking over the side. And that's how they took care of the security there. Now, I'm not sure how OSHA thought about that, but we never heard. So they build this huge tunnel that went from the Luxor to the Bellagio to the secret test site. And what they did is about 100 feet underground, and they had a underground terminal at Luxor, underground terminal at Bellagio, and the reason that they used Bellagio is because it already had a lot of underground parking already installed, and they didn't have to mess around trying to build underground parking. So that's why they used the Bellagio. And the reason they used the Luxor is because the Luxor is just across the street from Special Projects. So that all they had was a transportation system, and I don't know whether it's a moving sidewalk or what, to take the people at Special Projects who had authorization to go to the secret test site, put them on this transportation system, takes them a couple hundred feet across under Las Vegas Boulevard to the terminal under Luxor, and then they get on the subway, and it makes one stop at Bellagio and then up to the secret test site. And I've heard this trip only takes 21 minutes. It's got to be a very, very short time.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Anyway,
if it's maglev, yeah, it is fast. I mean, you would think it would be 21 minutes if it's traveling as fast as it is. And we know what above ground maglev trains are going, which is at least 300 miles per hour.
Yeah. So anyway, they opened that facility, and I believe it was 1990 everything was going. And everything went along fine until 2004 when they had to enlarge the underground secret terminal under the Bellagio. And somehow, someone driving a backhoe accidentally hit the main power grid for the Bellagio and knocked the power out for 3 days. Now, when you build a casino, the one thing you be sure can never happen is a power outage, because you have millions of dollars every hour going across the tables, and all to keep track of all this, you need a lot of power, and you can't ever have a power interruption. So they have all kinds of ways and backups to prevent power interruptions. But when this backhoe working on the secret terminal hit the main power grid, there was no backup. And they had to not only take care of all the people from the Bellagio and send them to other hotels, but now they had to confess their sins to Nevada Power, who knew nothing about this underground subway, and get them to help them put it back in operation, which means they had to take a number of Nevada Power employees, make them sign NDAs, the non-disclosure agreements, and get them to help put the power back on. And of course, if you go into your web right now and type in Bellagio power failure 2004, you'll see a whole bunch of stories about this, but what you won't see is what caused it. It was always the big mystery.
It was the hoe, right, that hit it. You're absolutely right. Bellagio power outage. I see 2004, even one in 2019. Like you said, you just search Bellagio power out, and then outage automatically fills in.
Yeah.
I also heard that these maglev trains that are connected in Nevada even connect here and at Edwards. Is that true?
Oh, absolutely. They are all over the place. Now there's uh, three different tunnel systems. There's the one that was here way before mankind ever got here, and that's the one the Navy uses, and their base is in San Diego. And that particular tunnel system goes all over the world, and that's why you never see a Navy personnel on an airplane. They're always using these high-speed tunnels. I'm trying to remember what the name they call it. There's a secret name that they call it, and I'll remember in a second. But anyway, there's that system, and then there is the one that crisscrosses the United States for whatever they're building underground. Now, I don't know what they're building underground, but they have cities, underground cities in every major city in the U.S., plus they have 6-lane highways connecting all these cities. Um, and all of that is a different tunnel system. Then there's a third tunnel system that they use in special cases that's not connected to either of those two, and those are the ones that connect Edwards with Groom Lake, with um, Los Alamos, with Kirtland Air Force Base in
New Mexico,
Albuquerque.
yeah, yeah. And even
Now,
further east, I heard at Wright-Patterson, they're connected too, right?
oh, absolutely. And there was a special on TV. I think it was can't remember how long ago it was, but it was the fact that there was construction going on the West Wing at the White House that nobody knew why, but all they knew it was 6 stories below the West Wing, and it was a lot of construction. It was all carefully hidden, and everybody was trying to figure out, what they were building, and the people that were advising this television investigation, they said, well, we're pretty sure it's to protect the White House from a 74 megaton nuclear bomb, which was all BS. What they were doing was they were connecting the White House with the underground
Network.
subway.
Yeah.
And now the President of the United States doesn't have high enough clearance to know about any of that. Clearances, there's 38 levels of clearance.
Above top secret, right?
Yeah, above top secret, there's 28 levels, and that's called top secret crypto. And then above level 28, there's 10 names. It's like Umbra, Ultra, different names, and the top one is Majestic. And the Majestic is the one that only 22 people, or in 1982, only 22 people held it. And that's the one that Bob Lazar was, that they were trying to elevate him to.
That's why he says he has 22 names and he's waiting for somebody else to come out that worked there, and then he'll reveal those names. I never figured that out. Now it makes sense.
Exactly. Yeah, that was it.
Now,
so then,
go on.
Go ahead. So then, the other thing is I moved to Las Vegas in 1973. I was working with an airline that bid on the gambling junket trips and moved down here from Seattle, and my folks had moved up to Reno, and I had occasion many times to drive from Las Vegas to Reno. And one of the interesting places is about halfway between the distance between Las Vegas and Reno was a little town called Hawthorne. And Hawthorne, Nevada, has a lake called Walker Lake. It's about 15 miles long. It's about 100 feet deep, no big deal. And it's a place where they used to store, or still store, all kinds of ammunition. And you drive by this place, and there's thousands of bunkers, both to the left and right of the highway. But anyway, when you enter the town from the south or the north, there's a big blue sign, and it says Naval Undersea Warfare Center. And there's a guard gate to it, and I could never figure out what they would have there. They would have to say Naval Undersea Warfare Center. I mean, it's in the middle of the desert. What could they? They're certainly not going to put a submarine in that lake. It's only 100 feet deep, and nobody sees any action on that lake, so that couldn't have been it. And only about 15 years ago did I find out what happened. And what happened was the 8 or 10 western states of the United States sit on a geographical plate that rests on the Pacific Ocean. And what they can do is there's 2 or 3 entrances that I know about. I'm sure there's more. There's one at Monterey Bay, and there's one at Malibu.
Yeah, that famous Malibu one with the pillars, and it's like hundreds of feet taller. I mean, but it's underwater.
Those are where the nuclear submarines couldn't get access to the Pacific Ocean that underlies the 10 western states. And, everybody wondered why DIA, the New Denver Airport, was so massive and so deep. That connects with the undersea Pacific Ocean. And there's a sub base there. There's a sub base at Groom Lake. There's sub bases everywhere. But anyway, when the Navy found that out, it just happened that in Hawthorne, to that mountain range, just to the northwest of Hawthorne, there's a secret manufacturing plant, huge, inside one of those mountains. And they would make all the real top secret weapons, missiles, all kinds of stuff for submarines. And their problem was they had to ship it by road, and they went north to Reno and then west over to San Francisco or Oakland, and or south to Las Vegas and then to San Diego to ship all of these weapons and missiles. And what they found out is they could just drill down 3,400 feet from the level at Hawthorne to the Pacific Ocean, and they can bring their subs in
right up
and park them under Nevada, and nobody would ever believe there was a submarine base under the middle of Nevada. But in fact, there is, and these elevators are huge, and they take the missiles and stuff down there. There's a huge submarine pin underneath Hawthorne, and that's where the submarines get all their new equipment and missiles and stuff, and then they just go out the Monterey Bay entrance. And I'm trying to think what the name of the little landing there at Monterey Bay. I can't remember. There's a large Army base there too, and that's all connected with all this that's going on. But I heard a story once. A friend told me that his dad worked on nuclear submarines in St. Louis, and we were trying to figure out. And he said, "Yeah, not models. I mean, the actual subs came there to St. Louis. We couldn't figure out how they got there, but then we figured out what they were doing was they're sailing from the Gulf up the Mississippi River." And a friend of ours said, "Well, that explains it." I said, "Explains what?" He said, "They're always dredging just outside St. Louis, and there's no reason to be dredging because all of the ships that go up and down are flat bottom. They're river boats. And, they don't have any draft. They don't have any hull under there. So why would they be dredging?" Well, they're dredging so that the nuclear submarines can get up there in St. Louis.
And stay undetected, too, because they're still below surface of the water.
Absolutely.
You mentioned Denver International Airport. What was up with all these paintings they had of, like, this Armageddon scene? I think if I'm not mistaken, maybe you can correct me on this, that they took them down, but a lot of people were talking about them when they were there. I saw them there in I think 1997. It was only one mural that I caught at the time. I didn't think much of it, but it wasn't until years later that I saw documentaries about all these murals of like this like post Armageddon, and I just didn't know what was up with that.
Yep, you're right, and I don't know. I have no idea. Obviously, somebody is planning for some kind of disaster. And that's why they have all this underground cities, underground highways, underground facilities, and it's kept very secret. And obviously they expect something to happen, which I doubt is going to happen. Earth has been here for 13 billion years, and all those stories you hear about the Big Bang, the Big Boom, is all BS. The universe has always been here and will always be here. There was no creator, there was no God. It's always been here. And not only is there this universe, but there's trillions of other universes. And there's also, now we know dimensions. We know what one dimension is. We know what two dimension is. We know that we live in the third dimension, and we assume that the fourth dimension is time. But the fact is, people ask, well, how many dimensions do you think there are? There's
unlimited, right?
Unlimited dimensions. So you just think about that and how big the universe is. I mean, there's a lot going on.
And I've actually heard that same thing too. That the big or the universe always has been and always will be, and it's a multiverse, just like you mentioned, multiple dimensions, and like you said, it's infinite.
Absolutely. So to think that there could be a God is just ridiculous, and I'm not trying to sway anybody out of their religion, but religion is just a bunch of bullshit, and always was, and all it was to get people thinking about what might be out there.
To control them, too, and give their money.
Yeah. All people have to do to survive is to take control and be responsible for themselves. Nobody's going to forgive you. You're going to have to accept your own responsibilities. And what we're here on Earth doing, and there's billions of Earths all doing the same thing. What we're here doing, all of us have lived hundreds of lives before this. You have, I have, everybody else has, and what we're doing here is we're taking a refresher course on living our lives with integrity, without envy, without hate, and without greed, and expressing our love to our families each and every day. And that's what we're here to learn about on Earth. And for some reason, we need this extra schooling on this type of stuff and on living with integrity. And that's what we're doing on Earth. Now, when you pass away, about 10 to 15 seconds after you die, you get met by whoever you believe in. If it's God, if it's Allah, in my case, it's the Great Pumpkin. And he takes you and they introduce you to many of the friends you had in previous lives. And about 45 minutes after that, you go to a room and you get a life review. Now, a lot of us think our lives are secret, and there's many things that happen in our life that nobody will ever know about. In fact, there is a three-dimensional, full-color, Dolby sound recording of every millisecond of your life. And that's shown to you, and you have to take responsibility for number one, all the loving things you've done, but then all the nasty things you've done. And if you think you're doing something or did something that nobody will ever know about, boy, have I got news for you. But the bottom line is the decision is made, and I don't know who makes the decision, as whether or not you've made enough progress towards living with integrity without envy, hate, or greed, and expressing love to your family, to stay there in the fourth dimension, which is where heaven is, or whether you got to be shipped back to Earth and do another lifetime.
To learn the lessons, right?
Right, learn the lesson. Now, the reason we don't know that is because this lesson has to be learned from within. They can't tell you, well, you better be a good boy or you're going to come back to Earth, because a lot of people might take advantage of that and cheat, but we don't have a chance to cheat because we don't know anything about it. Now, if you remember when Steve Jobs died here about 2 years ago.
That's what I was just going to ask you about. Yeah, when he passed away, what was the moments like?
10 seconds before he completely died, he kind of raised up in bed and said, "Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Oh, wow." And what he was seeing was the lobby. I call it a lobby. It's where you go when you die, and you're met by whoever you believe in. And it's so fantastic, so ornate, and so impressive that, I mean, it really got his attention. And that's where you go right when you die.
I saw a question here for you. Should we go to the light when we die or not?
Yes, but I haven't heard about the light lately. Now, I told a story on Art Bell many years ago, probably 25 years ago, that you shouldn't go towards the light because of the trick of the grays. I was wrong. That story came to me from, who was that guy that wrote Communion?
Whitley Strieber. Great guy.
Whitley Strieber.
Yeah.
Whitley Strieber used to call me at night at 2 o'clock, at 11 o'clock at night, 2 o'clock New York time, and talk for 2 hours every single night. And I recorded some of that, but he would go on and on and on about all this. I don't know why he called me. I wasn't particularly friends with him, but it went on for a long time, and when I told him about it, he didn't believe it.
He didn't remember it?
But anyway, he didn't remember it. So, but anyway, one of the things he told me was because he considered the Greys enemies, and they're not. They're just robots. The reason people think they're enemies is because they work for bad ETs as well as good ETs. They're just glorified robots, and when I say robots, I mean they're much more intelligent than humans, but they just do what they're told to do. They don't make up any particular agenda.
That's why they don't have sex organs, too, I've heard, right?
Right.
Because they're just clones, just glorified robots.
Absolutely, yeah.
Sentient beings that or they create to do whatever job they're set forth to do, in that case.
Absolutely.
Now, what do you know about the Dulce base? That's what I'm seeing here in the chat from Rockstar.
I posted, anybody that's seen my Facebook page, John Lear Facebook, in the last 2 years I've been posting secrets that I know about. I'm 76. I don't know how much longer I live, or I have to live. It really doesn't matter. But I've been posting the secrets that I know, and many of them are what I've just told you now, and other things. But I posted one about the Dulce base, how I got involved with Dulce, and all the things that happened to me. But the way the Dulce thing started was that I went to a get-together of the top 8 people in the U.S. who were involved in ufology and UFO information. And there was me, Linda Howe, Tom Adams, Christopher Lambright. There was 8 of us. And we spent a couple of days in this place called Crestone, Colorado. Somebody had donated a condominium that we stayed at, and we exchanged information. But during this conference, Tom Adams, who lived in Texas, and he was the one that used to publish Stigmata, his interest was cattle mutilations. And he came up to me and he said, "John," he said, "I just got this letter from this lady in Henderson, Nevada, and I don't have time to take care of it, and you're closer. Would you mind handling it? And I said, oh, I'd be happy to. And I read this letter, which I posted on my Facebook page. It's back a few years or so. And the letter talked about knowing a security guard who escaped from Dulce, that there were things going on there that were went against his grain of thought, really horrible experiments going on between humans and animals and stuff like that. And he didn't agree with it. He escaped, and when he escaped, he brought with him 7 minutes of videotape of one of the corridors, 25 black and white photos, and 100 pages of documentation. And what he did is he made 6 copies of each one and then put it into a container that was waterproof and very well protected. And they gave one of those containers to 6 of his friends. And he told his friends that if he missed a contact, and he would contact each one of them every 4 months. If he missed 2 contacts in a row, or 8 months, that they could do whatever they wanted with that box. So it turned out the person that wrote Tom Adams was a woman named Cherry Hinkle, and she has her own Facebook page, and she wanted us not to mention her name for the first few years of this, but now she's come out and said it's okay to say it was her. And when I got back from this conference, I got in contact with her, and we spent a lot of time together talking about Dulce, her telling me all of what the security guard told her, and also she had one of the boxes, and she took me to where it was hidden, which is near Dolan Springs in Arizona, south of Boulder Dam. And we actually drove down there, and you turn left off the highway, go for a couple miles, and there's a mountain to the right, and she showed me where she had hidden this box. So a couple of weeks after I met her, she showed me these pencil drawings, and I think there was 5 of them, that she had made of 5 of the black and white photos that the guy had taken in Dulce. And so they were on a piece of paper in pencil, and it was kind of hard to see them. So she asked me if I would trace those drawings in felt tip, black felt tip, and then she asked me to distribute them to my friends along with the story, which I did. And those became the infamous Dulce papers. I was the guy that released the Dulce papers. I was the guy that traced those drawings. I still have the original Dulce papers drawings, and I still have the original text that I wrote when I released those papers. And the way that I can prove that it was me, because I didn't sign anything, was that the text is typed in IBM executive typewriter. Now, the IBM executive proportional typewriter came out in 1965, and I bought one, and it was the first typewriter that used 5 spaces for each letter, and they're proportional, and it looked really neat. And on my particular typewriter, which I still have, one of the keys, I had them make a little Learjet. So instead of a period, or every once in a while, I could just tap that key and a little Learjet would appear on the paper. But
signature.
Anyway,
nice signature. Yeah.
So I typed that and put out the Dulce papers, but I didn't sign it, other than people knew who sent it, and those were the original Dulce papers.
Someone here is asking about what you think about, let me find it here, about the demonic 9-foot grays that do the human mutilations. What do you think about them? What do you know about them is the question from Stacy Singer.
Nothing about 9-foot demonic grays. There are all kinds of ETs, trillions of them. and they're always going to show up. Sometimes they're gray, sometimes they're white, sometimes they're different colors. There's so many that I can't keep track of them. I know the United States has 87 different ETs under ice that they know about. At least that was 20 years ago. They had 87. They might have more.
You
But
mean from crashes and stuff like that? Is that what you mean on ice?
Yeah.
So dead
Absolutely.
bodies. Wow, geez, that's a more number than I expected. Because obviously we both know Clifford Stone said in the 80s that then they cataloged 57, but he said obviously he thinks it's going to be a lot more as times progress, and that was 30 years ago.
Yeah, Clifford Stone and I spent a lot of time together. After the Crestone thing, Linda needed a ride down to Albuquerque. And so I had my truck there, and I offered to take her. So after the conference, we drive south out of Crestone down to Alamosa, and then the highway that leads to Albuquerque that goes by Los Alamos, and just south of, or just north of Los Alamos. Now, remember, this is 1987. We get tracked by 3 F-117As. Now, in those days, they were really secret, and I think they had just released the existence of the F-117As, and but they were flying right alongside of us, and we always thought that was interesting because F-117As were based out of Tonopah, and Los Alamos was a long ways from Tonopah, so we never figured that out. We went to Albuquerque, and that night we had dinner with Colonel Ernie Edwards, U.S. United States Air Force colonel, and his job was to babysit or follow Dr. Benowitz. And Benowitz, I had met and actually stayed at his place.
Paul Benowitz, you mean, right?
What?
Paul Benowitz?
Paul Benowitz. And he invited me to stay at his house for a couple of nights, and he told me the whole story about the girl that had come to him or he had met somehow, and she had been taken to Dulce, and that was part of a confirmation that Dulce existed. And then later, I had 2 friends that worked at Dulce that confirmed it, and then also when Bob Lazar worked at S4, he heard the word Dulce several times, people that had been there. He never saw any documentation. The only documentation he saw that confirmed the story I heard what is called the war at Dulce, and there was never a war. All it was an altercation when 66 people were killed, and what happened was in 1979, Gray was giving a lecture to 44 scientists. And when I say lecture, they don't have mouths or anything. You don't hear any sound. He was giving it through mental telepathy. And in this small auditorium inside Dulce, for some reason, a Delta Force officer walked into that room, and he had a sidearm. And everybody at Dulce is briefed that you never, ever approach anywhere near a Gray with a sidearm that has ammunition in it, because he will kill you instantly. So this officer either forgot or didn't know or was careless or what, and when he came in the room, the Gray killed him instantly. And the room was, they had cameras in there, and the Delta Force headquarters saw their friend get zapped, and they went down there. There was an additional 21 of them went down there to take revenge on the Gray, and the Gray killed everybody, all 22 Delta Force and all 44 scientists, and that was called the altercation at Dulce. And Sherry had told me about that. Terry had told me about that years, when I first met her. And then after Bob Lazar went to work at S4, he told me that he read the story of the altercation but it didn't say Dulce. It said it happened at Area 51. And
Interesting.
what I think was Bob's clearance when he was given that briefing. And he says he had 80 to 100 briefings to read,
Yeah,
and
for
they were all
before he went in, when they were updating his clearance. That's right. Yes.
right. And when they were updating his clearance, when he read that story, his clearance wasn't high enough to know about Dulce, and that's why I think that the altercation that he read was identical with Dulce. So his clearance just wasn't high enough to know about Dulce at that time.
I know Bob doesn't like to talk about the briefing documents the most because I know he says publicly that he can't verify it. However,
Right.
if in the documents he was able to at least verify what he did, I would think that the rest of the documents are correct. So personally, I just want to know what's in those damn files. Right?
Yeah, there's. He told me a little bit, not much more than I've told you or we all know about, but there had to be a lot of information in the AV documents that he read. Um, One interesting thing is when George Knapp hired Tavernetti to do the lie detector test. Remember that?
Yes, yes. There's
Okay.
four polygraphs that he underwent.
So when Bob went with Gene Huff to where they were doing the lie detector test, they got there early, and nobody was there. But there was a room, and it had a table and 2 or 3 chairs, and it was kind of dimly lit. And they looked inside and then stayed out in the lobby where this room was. And Gene noticed Bob sat down and turned white. And he said, "Hey, are you okay? What's going on?" And Bob said, "When I looked in that room with that table and that chair, I had a flashback to when I was reading those documents, and there was a gray sitting across from me the whole time I read those documents."
Interesting. Yeah, that is definitely something new I've heard. And one other thing new that he's revealed that I've never heard him say before is that at least one of the craft was found in an archaeological dig. I mean, that took me for a loop.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he recently said that it's in Jeremy Corbell's new movie, and also as Joe Rogan interviewed him. So that's kind of where that started to come out, and especially Joe Rogan. I did a little segment on just talking to Bob about the fact that, what happened with the guy with the brushes. If you're looking for a dinosaur bone or you're, digging it up with a brush, what happens when you start finding some metal and then all of a sudden it's like, holy crap, this is not supposed to be here. I mean, it sure as heck is not supposed to be there if you'd really think about it. But then that would raise the question of like how long have we been visited, and if what Bob Lazar said is true that we have had 65 external corrections, that we have been visited at least from one species for over 10,000 years, or what about the others who have been visiting us for say 250 million years?
Yeah, and we've been here or Earth has been here for 13 billion years. I couldn't even begin to guess how many civilizations have been here since the beginning of Earth, and I can tell you it's a lot, and civilization's far more advanced than we are. So, we're just the new guys, and we're considered the morons of the solar system. Our solar system has 40 planets, not 9 like NASA tells you. There's 40 of them. Each one of those 40 planets has civilizations on them, and each one of those planets has 1 or 2 moons, and they all, are far, far more advanced than Earth, both scientifically, technologically, and sociologically advanced. There's all kinds of trade and travel and communication going on. It's so busy that, we're just the morons on Earth. We think, we're the top of the line.
But it's the
We're just,
opposite, really not. As we're, I think I always say it this way: is we've had technology come to us so fast in the last 120 years. I don't know if humanity is quite mature enough to really handle every breakthrough that we have.
They're not, and that's why they put the Van Allen belt. And there's 3 stages to the Van Allen belt, and they're put there specifically so that we can't go out and contaminate the solar system with our tribal warfare ideas. Now, on the moon, as you've seen all my stuff, there's at least 500 million people that live up there. They're humans, just like us, but not from Earth. They're technologically and sociologically advanced. They have all kinds of technological farming, industry up there. There's so much going on the moon, which has been hidden from us. When we look at the moon, we're actually looking at a holograph covering the surface of the moon, or a great portion of it. But there is so much going on up there. It's unbelievable. I have this photo I have on my wall in, I think, 1996. I saw the photo, Lunar Orbiter 2162M, and it's an oblique photo of the north interior face of Copernicus. And it's such an amazing picture. I was looking at a picture that was printed in a Canadian magazine, or actually a Canadian book, and it was, I think the book was called Exploring Space with a Telescope, or something like that. And I was looking at this photo very, very carefully because there's so much going on in there. And I saw three things that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Now, I remember exactly where I was. I was at that Crew Hotel south of Los Angeles, trying to remember its name, and I was standing by for a flight, and I was just sitting there on the bed reading this book, and I saw four giant cylinders that had to be something like something like gas or oil or something like that. They were huge. And then I saw 3 puffs of vapor. And so then that's when I got to thinking, well, there can't be vapor if it's a vacuum. There's got to be air there. And that led me to the moon has a breathable atmosphere. There's no doubt about that. And the gravity on the moon is 69.71% of that of Earth, not 1/6 as
they tell us.
NASA tells us.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, that's what they tell us.
So,
1/6.
Yeah, Newton was wrong, and the person that figured out that both he and Einstein were full of BS was a lady named Perry Spolter, and she wrote a book in 1993, published by Granada Publishing, called Gravitational Force of the Sun. And if you're interested in gravity, I suggest you buy this book, because it'll tell you exactly why Newton was wrong and why Einstein was essentially a blithering idiot. But what she says is there is no basis for Newton's assumption that gravitational force is due to and proportional to the density or quantity of matter. And once you understand that, you'll understand all the stuff that NASA's been telling you about the universe is bullshit. So, if you want to really expand your horizons, buy that book. Again, it's called The Gravitational Force of the Sun by Perry Spolter, Spolter. She has a Facebook page. She's quite elderly at this point, but I have the distinct honor to have been instructed by her on all her theories, because I didn't take math and only I had a year of college, and on some of these things you have to know a little bit about it. And she took me by the hand, and I have 1 3-inch binder full of correspondence between me and her, and she was so helpful and so patient to walk me through that. And she really deserves a Nobel Prize, but since she isn't part of the scientific community,
Yeah,
she's not going to get it.
Yeah, that's true.
But believe me, 50 or 100 years from now, they're going to realize that she was correct.
Let me ask you about element 115. Have you ever seen it?
Yeah, I held it.
Interesting. And is it just like it's described as triangular chip, sort of?
Yep, yep. And I made a copy of it with a piece of metal, and that fits in Bob's half scale. Now, the half scale model of the antimatter reactor was made by a guy named Joe Vananetti, and Bob has always kept that. And I visited him once in when he lived in Albuquerque, and we were out in his garage fooling around, and I went over and I picked it up and I looked at it, and he said, "You want it?" I said, "Are you kidding?" He said, "Yeah, you want to have it?" I said, "Absolutely." So I took it home with me and polished it up, and it sits in my cabinet here. But it has the antimatter reactor and the little coffee cup, upside down coffee cup in the center, and you take the top off, and there's a little area in there where the triangle fits in, and then the cap goes on, and then you put the half sphere on, and it activates. Of course, mine doesn't. It's just a model, but that little sphere I had, and one night, Bob and me, and I think it was Jim Taliani, were doing an experiment, and of course, I didn't know what they were doing, but they explained it to me. They had this. We had originally had 3 pieces of 115, and I can't tell you where we got them, but Bob wanted to prove the properties of 115, so he had a large bell jar, and we went down to the went down to 7-Eleven, bought some dry ice, and brought it back, and then he had a piece of. I'm trying to think of the radioactive material that we hung over it. I don't know why I've forgotten that, but it puts out alpha, beta, and gamma rays, shoots them out at tremendous speeds, and we hung that from the top of the inside of the bell jar directly over the 115, which sat on a piece of dry ice. And when we put the bell jar on, the dry ice created a fog, and when it got dense enough, we could see the rays shooting out from this radioactive material and going down, being pulled down into the 115, which showed the attractive properties of the 115, which is absolutely ironclad proof that 115 is what he said it was, and that it had those amazing properties to be able to pull those rays from heading out at thousands of millions of miles an hour down into the 115 itself. And we recorded that, and Bob kept a copy, which he can't find. We gave a copy to George Knapp, which
Is this called the cloud chamber test?
Yeah.
Yeah, about a minute of it was uncovered. Jeremy uncovered it recently, not too long ago at Bob's house.
Okay, what was uncovered?
The cloud chamber test, about a minute of the
Oh,
footage.
oh,
Yeah.
okay. I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I know. I was always curious what that was because I never got an explanation from Jeremy or Bob didn't really talk about it. I just know that finally some of the footage was found at his house, and he said in typical Bob fashion there was only a minute of it, and the rest was recorded over.
Interesting. Very interesting.
One test I always really was amazed with what he mentioned when with the candle, right? The candle experiment where the
Yeah.
flame essentially stood still in time.
Yeah. Right. Right.
That really freaked me out. It just goes to show that once we actually once we material scientists get to that point of physics and we realize that what we know is all wrong and what
Absolutely.
the technology is all right, then that's going to be like the final piece of pie to encase this
Right.
circle to make us and get us to the next step.
Yeah. Dr. J, it's been great talking to you.
It's always a
I'm going to
pleasure.
sign off here.
Real quick before you do, I'm going to ask you to stay off air so I can finish up the show real quick. But real quick, where can people find you?
On Facebook.
Okay. Okay. With
Just
that
John
being
Lear.
said, friends, remember this is Dr. J, host of Dr. J Radio Live. The only thing you need to remember is the name of the show, DRJ Radio Live.